Reads, and I'm back for another book review. If you're in need of something to read, you should take a look at this book called Howard's End by E.M. Forster. It's a classic novel, and if you don't know, E.M. Forster wrote several classic novels in the early 1900s. He's generally considered one of the best Edwardian-era authors, so I was really excited to try him out, and I was really impressed with this book. The story centers around the Schlegel sisters, Helen and Margaret, who are these moderately wealthy, independent young women living in London. They're socially progressive, they have all these, they're very idealistic. And over the course of the book, they come into the orbit of the Wilcox family, who are even wealthier, and they're relatively socially conservative and materialistic. Howard's End basically explores the rapid modernization of his own society, of Forster's society, by looking at the relationship between these two families. And you might think this is just another book of hoity-toity rich people gossiping over tea, but it's really a lot more than that. Forster uses the tensions of the time to sort of poke holes in the complacency of this family, which makes it a lot more engaging to read than you might think from just looking at the synopsis. One of the best examples of how this book weaves rapid modernization and anxiety into the writing is just the way that London is depicted in this. The city of London in Howard's End is not just a static backdrop, it's a city in a state of upheaval. Old properties are being torn down to make way for these new modern apartment buildings. There are trains and cars now that are kicking up dust and smoke and noise, while people are being made more mobile than ever before. Old aristocratic families are slipping down the economic ladder amidst the rise of the bourgeois class, and women are suddenly demanding the right to vote. There's tensions between England and Germany that are foreshadowing the Great War. Everything was changing, and everyone knew it. And you really get that sense in this book. It's not right in your face all the time, it's just this underlying sense that things that we took for granted might not be here a decade from now, and that's something that kind of is a consistent through line throughout the novel. But Howard's End is more than just a soapbox for social commentary. The author does a great job at assigning certain characters with certain ideologies without making them feel like empty mouthpieces. And one of the ways he does that is by showing how the surroundings and upbringing of the characters kind of informs how they think and act. The Schlegels, on one hand, are, they're independent young women, they don't rely on any men, and they live in the city and they interact with people like actors and writers and artists. So they're more open-minded, they advocate for social good and women's suffrage, whereas the Wilcoxes are far wealthier. They are very isolated because they're all landowners, they're surrounded by servants, so they're much more conservative, and so that's where a lot of the tension comes in. And one of the best ways that tension comes about is the way that the Schlegels and the Wilcoxes view houses and homes, with the Schlegels seeing homes as, places with souls, with sentiment, and the Wilcoxes view homes and land and even people as commodities and investments. And at the core of this sort of ideological struggle is the property of Howard's End, which is this house with sort of dubious ownership, which ends up becoming the focal point of a lot of the themes in the book. But of course, no book about rich people getting together and talking is complete unless there's a relationship. And the second half of this book is taken up by a relationship, which is so agonizing. The characters are a bad match for each other. The whole time you're wondering, why did they get together? Why are they putting up with each other? And the husband is so insufferable. The whole time you're just hoping that the wife is going to come to her senses and just backhand him, just once. The relationship has the same condescending, husband knows best kind of dynamic that I criticized in 11/22/63. But Howard's End makes the relationship so engaging to watch play out, and a big part of that, the reason for that, is that unlike in 11/22/63, Forster is trying to critique these types of relationships. He's using them as a way of holding up a mirror to the casual misogyny of his society, and he's also trying to bridge a lot of social gaps, because obviously with this book Forster is grappling with a lot of tensions and polarization that he was seeing around him. You know, modernity versus tradition, and femininity versus masculinity, spirituality versus materialism, and the gaps between different generations and different social classes. So by watching him play with those concepts through the relationship, it makes it really interesting and a lot of fun to read, even though you're kind of pulling your hair out a little bit. So if you're reading this book and you're really frustrated by the relationship, first of all, I empathize. But I also encourage you to watch it play out, because Forster has a lot of very strong female characters in here. And while they constantly have to navigate through a minefield of fragile male egos, he's still using it to say something. And by the end of the book, I was very worried, because a lot of my enjoyment was hinging upon how he, wrapped up this relationship. And fortunately, he does a great job with it. I really enjoy the ending. It may not have ended exactly like I wanted, but it gave me something to chew on in a way that I was really happy with. The other big thing that really carried me through this book was E.M. Forster's excellent writing style. He's often called the spiritual successor to Jane Austen, and I can really see why, because, both authors were very concerned with criticizing the upper classes or gender roles. They both had this wry wit that was kind of underpinning all of their writing, and their dialogue was very well constructed and flowing. But although I've only read one book by each author, I much preferred Howard's End over Pride and Prejudice, and one of the reasons for that is that Forster is much less likely to over-explain the motivations of his characters, and more importantly for me, is that he's much more descriptive than Jane Austen. And he's also very deft at integrating his themes into the way that he describes things, especially when it concerns modernity and all the anxieties of his time. And that's part of why this book is so much more immediate, is that he's grappling with a lot of the same things that we are now. Just like us, he was going through a time period where people were very conscious of the fact that things were rapidly changing forever. He was also writing at the end of a life of a monarch, and here we are at the end of the life of Queen Elizabeth II. So in those ways, this book is very highly recommended from me. I would say it's definitely worth going back and seeing that we're not the only generation to deal with all of these social, political, cultural tensions. I really only had two tiny problems with this book. One, and this might be a little weird, but I got confused over who was talking at several points in the book, and I needed to backtrack to figure it out. It might just be me, but yeah, that's just something I noticed. And then the other thing is that there was a plot thread that I was pretty engaged in, but it ended in a way that seemed a little bit clumsy for me, as if, once its purpose had been fulfilled, it was just like, okay, bye, we're done with this part. And I was like, oh. But maybe on a second read that would, even itself out. Overall, though, the book is really, really good. I gave it an 8 out of 10, and that makes it one of the best books I've read all year. So yeah, definitely check it out. And if you're interested in learning about the time period that this is set in, I would recommend the book The Vertigo Years by Philip Blom, which looks at the first 14 years of the 1900s and talks about all the cultural changes and the technology that was basically changing the world very quickly. But yeah, that's about it. So if you want to talk to me about E.M. Forster or any other classic books, I'd love to hear from you. And consider subscribing if you want to see more random reviews from me at whenever I feel like it. But yeah, that'll have to do it. So see you later. Leave.